Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Manson Saga discussion panel. I'm Paul. It's Danny After Dark. Like and subscribe. And down there, the man that you can find under hashtag Candle Daddy, Mr. Beckham.
What's up, man?
How's it going, you guys?
Hey, guys.
I am well jet lagged still from my trip out east. And we have a lot.
What is that exactly? What I've never understood it.
Jet lag? Well, because you get used to going to bed at a different time and waking up at a different time.
Oh.
Thank you, Nick. He said part one of the interview kicked ass. I'm glad that you guys liked it. It was a heavy interview to do. So the first time I talked to Anthony, we talked for like 2 hours, and by the end of it, I went upstairs and I was just like disoriented. It was because it's so heavy because of who you're talking to. Like, I've talked to people on the one side and I've talked to authors and stuff, but none of the victims' families. I've heard stuff through the grapevine and everything, but it was really full on. And there was a lot of back and forth beforehand before we talked, and he's a swell fella. I like him a lot.
For anybody who either didn't see part one or didn't get a chance to really look into the thumbnail, what is the interview you're referring to? Who was it, and who was his relation to the case?
Well, I interviewed Anthony DiMaria, who is the nephew of Jay Sebring. And it was like an hour and 45 minutes or something. And so I busted it up, or an hour and a half. And so I busted it up into 2 parts. The next part's a little bit longer, and I have to cut a little out because it got kind of shaky and a couple of bits with the recording. But
translation, Paul dropped the ball and probably
always. Are you kidding? I'm like minus.
Was there a cat attack at the door?
No cat attack this time.
Oh.
That was funny when that happened.
Yeah, that scared the crap out of me. No, now I have my noise canceling on my headphones. Anyway, yeah, thank you guys all very much for the kind words about it.
So before we jump into talking about and breaking down part one, if anybody missed it, definitely make a point to go back and check it out. Or honestly, even if you've already listened to it, go back and listen again. I've listened to it several times personally, and each time I'm picking up something that I missed in the first go, because Anthony gives a lot of great information. So go back and check it out if you've missed it. And for everybody who is popping in the chat, welcome. Thank you for joining us again. As Paul said, thank you for everybody for the great comments on the interview. Paul did okay. Anthony did fabulous. Paul did okay.
We had talked about beforehand, because he has a book coming out in the summer of the same name as the documentary, Jay Sebring, Cutting to the Truth. And a lot of the things that people were like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Are going to be in the book, right? So nobody who's writing a book is going to give away the whole kit and caboodle right out of the gate. So it was very, very deep and very intense is what the conversation. And once the book comes out, we'll be able to go into a whole bunch of other stuff. But after I release part 2, I'm going to put out some paperwork he sent me and just some pictures that have to do with the conversation. And that'll be available on our Facebook page, and I'll try and figure out where else to put it. Instagram is awful for posting documents because you can't do anything. You can't show the whole picture. You have to, the only way that you can show the whole picture is if you only put one picture in. So we'll put links to our Facebook page, and if you're not on there, it has a ton of documents. There's a files section on the Facebook thing, and there's like books and documents and all sorts of stuff. So part 2 will be out within the next couple weeks. I'm going to do the final touches on it over the next few days, and so probably not a couple weeks, probably a week. But yeah, what's the point of having a candle if you can't burn it at both ends?
Speaking of candles.
Yeah, Mr. Beckham.
Yes.
Anyway,
Forest fur.
Oh yes.
So first and foremost, I do want to say, and I can't believe I apologize for my voice. I'm still getting over being sick the last few days. So please, my apologies. So Paul, to give credit where credit is due, and it pains me to give you a compliment, but you did a really great interview with Anthony. You asked questions, but you let him speak. So every point he wanted to get out, you let him do. Except once, there was once where you did cut him off.
Oh, there's moments, but it's
in part 2, we'll see.
Yeah,
but in part 1,
for the most part, it was just
and that just shows a great interviewer. You let him get across what he wanted to get across. So I just wanted to give that credit where credit is due.
Well, thank you. I did the whole time think, don't say anything. Just be quiet. Just let him talk. Just shut up. It was the whole time. It was just like, because stuff will jump into my head and I'll be, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't want to do that because I knew that he had stuff he wanted to talk about, and I had just made a few pivot points. He's such a great speaker too. The thing that it's not like I'm not having to pull it out of him. You know what I mean? Like there's no having to point him in any direction because he gets the whole thing across very eloquently. And so, but thank you very much. That's me deflecting from any compliments. That's
people in the chat seem to agree as well. So,
thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. It meant a great deal to do good on that because it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's such a personal thing for him, and it's a lot of responsibility if you're going to do that to do it right and to put out the full information that you can. So as we go through Danny's notes, I'll fill in a bit here and there. I want to talk a bit about the text tapes. I have a few different things on here to just kind of brush across, like the appeal that Tex had put together when the bankruptcy hearing was happening. Then also when Leslie Van Houten's lawyer was trying to get the Watson tapes, and there's also an article that was written on them that has actual quotes from the tapes. So I'll talk a little bit about that stuff, and then there's a couple of other things. We're going to go over the parole documents from last time that are legit, so that's fun. and yeah,
I was gonna say, man, I don't know if this is a Canadian thing, but you deserve some tea and a cookie for the interview.
Handshake and a hero cookie.
Yeah, whatever you guys do. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
All right.
Yeah, if you want to, let's jump right into it. It's going to be a long one.
Yeah. So the interview, if you guys have seen the video, you'll notice that there are timestamps where there are different sections of the interview. So the notes that I have that we're all just kind of go off of kind of falls within that. So the first kind of part was Anthony talking about murder and the media effects and portrayals on the victims' families. He talks about how something so private and personal and tragic became a form of entertainment, not just throughout the United States, but ultimately the entire world. For example, the victims' families were having to see things on TV shows, movies, seeing musicians, and just people in general wearing, Charlie shirts, for example. And Anthony talks about, for him, it seemed like the world had turned upside down, that the people that killed the victims were ultimately being kind of sculpted into rock star serial killers, if you will. And then he goes on a little bit about kind of memorabilia, murderabilia, which we're all familiar with that, and the glamorization of like Manson, Tex Watson, Atkins, Van Houten, Krenwinkel, etc. And he also talks about how his uncle, so Jay Sebring, when he was killed, ultimately he became kind of a peripheral footnote of what happened. And the documentary that Anthony is making and the book that is going to be coming out is to restore the man who lived and also the man who was ultimately killed. And it's now time to tell the truth.
One thing that when I was talking to Anthony before the show, like the way I have to look at these things and the way that it kind of clicked for me to be not so frivolous with the way that I did this was, so I have a real tough time watching World War II stuff because my grandpa was in Auschwitz and my grandmother was in a separate camp, but then ultimately ended up in Auschwitz as well. And so there's movies and documentaries and all sorts of stuff all the time about World War II, right? So it's a constant reminder of the horrors that my family went through, but it's not about my specific family members, and it's not showing the specific way that my family members were killed again and again and again and again, and then turned on their side and turned the family members into this and turned the family members into that and used them this way and the next. And one of the things that I kind of equated it to as well is like when the people died, everybody had a story about them, right? Post-death, everybody was throwing stuff there. And it reminded me of, have y'all seen The Crucible?
Mm-hmm.
You know, about the Salem witch trials. And it's like, I saw goody so-and-so with the devil. I saw so-and-so with the devil.
Do I know about the Salem witch trials?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in The Crucible, yeah, which is on the Salem witch trials, that's one of the things everybody points at each other is, I saw so-and-so with the devil. I saw so-and-so with the devil. And that's kind of the sort of craziness that started happening after the fact. And like we've seen with so many things in this subject, you take a little sprinkling of truth and you just change it and turn it and twist it and turn it into a giant crazy thing that, you know, we may not have all the information on. And people get stuck on it too. So on the one side of things, you'll have somebody explain something with a certain amount of you know, hearsay or whatever, and it won't be good enough for some people, but then the same amount of hearsay on the other side, they'll be like, oh, it's fact, right? And that's just, it's a tough one to break yourself of. And like, so I'm always malleable to that. I did see that Tom O'Neill posted his rebuttal to the thing, and it's not really a rebuttal. It's just he posted some stuff of Anthony chatting with him before he'd fully read the book. And so I'm sure there will be a rebuttal to the next one too. And then whatever else, which is fine. It's all good. If he puts out more information, all hail, like whatever. But yeah, it wasn't what it said it was. And the last time he put stuff out that was like, oh, about the parole documents, well, it turns out they're true. The ones that we posted before that I apologized for, which I shouldn't have. But yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. People are going to believe whatever they want, ultimately. And I've talked to Anthony about that too, and like things like people saying, "Oh, he's doing it for the money." If y'all haven't noticed, they put it up for free on YouTube, on the actual YouTube like rental thing. It's free there, so he's not making a bunch of money off that. He's not going to make a bunch of money off the books. That's not what it's about. It's about getting their side of the story out with the information that he's gathered, with the paperwork that he has, and people are going to believe what they want. It's not anyone's job to convince anyone, especially when they've got it in their head that it's one way or another. And so,
well, the thing whatever. The thing is that this whole, the whole story is compelled with a lot of elements, or it surrounds itself with a bunch of elements, right? That you have to literally go and research yourself. There's so many things that go into the story, and I think people look for the quick answer, and there is no quick answer, right? No. They want like just the 10 something summarized that says from the beginning to the end, and that's it. Well, it's unfortunately it is not that. There's so many things that go into this story, right? And you literally have to go do the research yourself to get clarity on a lot of the truths that are out there. And I've always said there's minimal truths out there, right? But you got to find them. It's just so much, that goes into the story that people don't have the time to the research. I mean, we got into it because of COVID, right? We've always talked about that, or else I wouldn't have had the time to get into it.
No, none of us would have.
Yeah, none of us would have had the time to get into it. And I've always said for me, it was chaos. Was Tom O'Neill's book was the reason I got into it initially, and then of course we met doing research, and then we met, and then we're here. But yeah, man, it's just so much that goes into the story that if you short yourself without doing the research into all the different components that go into the story, that's where you start to line up the mistruths and everything like that, because they're there, and it's almost like propelled for an easy way out to like, because you want that answer, you want the truth, like the whys, right? The hows, the whys, and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. This is a very complex story, and there's so many characters, or not characters, but you know what I mean. There's so many.
Yeah, there's involved. So many characters too.
I know, but there's so many people involved, and there's just so much to the story, man. That it's not something that you can just figure out in a month. There's too much, right?
Yeah, people will take one part of it, and that's their thing, right? Like take the Bug for example, Vincent Bugliosi.
Well, he tries to get right to the he tries to put it all together in that book, man.
Well, they all do, right? That's the thing about these books, is that they have their story and they're sticking to it. And the thing with Helter Skelter is, and you talking about half truths and stuff like that, minimal truths. Helter Skelter was their belief system. Right?
Oh, like man,
there's so many people were talking about it. It's written on the wall. There's
internet
Susan Atkins, coming, her story being put out to the masses. It was coming from different places that wouldn't have been together to talk about it and make up some sort of thing, right? It just wasn't the whole reason. It wasn't the reason for the murders, right? It was a factor in them thinking like, oh, well, the world's fucking gonna end anyway, and all this sort of stuff, and just the whole group think.
Well, that's one of the things that Anthony touches upon. Let's just jump right there. Is Helter Skelter and the Bugs' book, and what he says is that the Bugs' book has basically been viewed as scripture in this whole case, and Anthony obviously takes a lot of issue of how Bugs talks about in his characterization of Jay Sebring. And one thing to note with that is that not just Bugliosi, but a lot of the other authors, he just talks about how these crimes have been monetized and turned basically into a cash grab, plain and simple.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's not everyone though, but it feels like people are trying to play the lottery a lot of the time. If they're pushing it in that direction, because like lightning struck for Tom when Joe Rogan grabbed onto it, right? And then that just put it into his whole section of people who are just like, yeah, whatever.
So, yeah.
Nobody really wants to dig that deep into this. So when it was like, when people were talking about Helter Skelter being like the thing, they were like, yeah, why wouldn't it be? Because you read the book and it's classified as a true story. There you go.
And he was the assistant district attorney. He was the assistant district attorney, and
and then you get Chaos come out, and Joe Rogan's like, "Fuck yeah, the CIA does everything." The guy who laid my floor, I had to rip it up to see if there were bugs in it. Like just this sort of over the top conspiracy nonsense. And he was cued. He was totally like ready for it. And so when Tom got on there. Now, Tom's done a lot of research and he's done a lot of Freedom of Information Acts, and we've been able to read some of the stuff that's been put out, right? On the other hand, there's lots of stuff that's just been like cherry picked. So
yeah, and we'll get into that because that's one of the things that Anthony does talk upon as the interview goes on. But I just want to quickly, before we carry on with this, it's one thing for me, for Beckham, for Paul to kind of recap and re-talk about how the interview went. And it's another thing to actually hear it for yourself in regards to, for me personally, hearing Anthony speak, like you hear it in his voice. You hear the sadness, but you hear the anger. You hear the frustration. Decades and decades of frustration of how his family member, his loved one, his uncle has been portrayed. And especially in a case like this, he has every right to be pissed and to be angry at society, in the media, and everybody who has done his uncle wrong. And now he, after all this time, is like, I'm setting the record straight. But again, you pick that up in his tone of voice. So again, for anybody that hasn't listened to it, please do yourself a service and listen to it, because hearing us recap about it, it's not going to do it justice. You have to hear it from him personally.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say real quick, like, what we were just talking about, Paul, like to follow up, Sam Smith has a good quote in the chat. He's like, the Manson, and I could probably write a whole paper on what this actually means with the whole compelled story. But he wrote, the Manson story was made in Hollywood, for Hollywood, and by Hollywood. That's kind of like, it just blows up, right? Kind of like everything that you're talking about.
It has all the makings of everything Hollywood shows, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's been, man, talk about kicking a dead horse. You know what I mean? Like that's probably a terrible choice of words, but but you know what I mean? Like it's just over and over, and like the story's been told so many different ways and so many times, and the same way so many times. Yeah. It's intense. I want to just a couple of things in the chat here I want to touch upon.
Yeah.
As far as Andy said, I have very little faith in what the police told him. Not that I'm saying they are full of info either. Could be something, but could be nothing. So it's not just basing it on what the police told Anthony that I think that there isn't too much to the Watson tapes. It's also to do with the article that has the people who have listened to it. The Watson, when he was trying to go for the LAPD to not have the tapes, he had no problem with them listening to them. Now, to me, that says like there's nothing he's trying to hide on there from law enforcement. And if he's not trying to hide anything from law enforcement that's supposed to use all this stuff to blow everything out of proportion, then I don't think there's anything crazy that they're going to show. Also, I don't think that it has talking about Manson killing anyone, because if there was, it would do him a service to show that and to be like, look, because look, Grogan told them where Shay's body was, and that got him out of prison. Even if it just showed that Watson was trying to be, honest about what was on the tapes. Watson and the cops are not working together. That's not something that is happening. Watson is not in cahoots with the LAPD. So them seeing it is just like them seeing it from him makes it seem like it's pretty benign. He's not going to get in more trouble, right? And then you also have when they talk about it in Leslie Van Houten's case. They talk about some of the stuff that's on there. They also say at the very end that, contrary to what they had said earlier, not the people that were speaking now, the courts were saying that there wasn't actually any ongoing investigations now that they had in there. Technically, the tapes should be out, or you should be able to get them, because as soon as Watson sold them to Chaplain Ray, and he was able to listen to them and they were able to write about them and all that sort of stuff, that kind of took attorney-client privilege out of it, which is what they were hanging their hat on to not get it out. So, a lot of it, I wonder if drugs were discussed on the tapes. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't think that it's anything that's going to blow anything out of the water. I think it's going to be a lot like the Bobby interview with the guy from the Garbage People that I was able to get from UCLA, where there's a lot of proselytizing and talking about some of the other people. A lot of the anything, I think they said that Leslie Van Houten was spoken about 8 times or something like that.
That's
and it was, yeah. And like most of it was when they were like, well, who is with you? And he never said her last name. He would just say Leslie or Lulu. But yeah, so there's some paperwork to do with that, and I will post it on our Facebook page after this. I was going to read it, but there's not really any point. I've pretty much told you guys about it, unless you want to hear it actually in their words. But I don't think it's necessary when you can read it. Nick, Anthony killed my hopes that the tapes had something. But it's not just him, right? Like, you can't just listen to one thing. You gotta look at the different spots. And at the same time, there will still be people being like, well, don't listen to the cops and don't listen to the courts and don't listen to Watson because they're all in cahoots. And I really like the word cahoots. So
yeah, you've said it quite a few times tonight.
3 to be exact. But it doesn't make it any less impactful.
It sounds like a Canadian vegetable.
Wow. Paul goes away on a trip and he comes back with a new learned word. I'm so proud.
Cahoots. Are we having cahoots tonight? I don't know.
I went to a maple farm for like maple syrup and stuff and saw them had all the trees tapped with tubes going to each one. It was the most Canadian thing, apart from like if a beaver walked across the street while we were there. Like that would have been the full Canadian experience. Anyway, I'll keep looking here, and yeah, go ahead, Danny. My spiel is done.
Thank goodness. So Anthony talks about being reminded, not just him, but I'm sure with the other families as well, 15 to 20 times a year throughout the media, about Jay and about the other victim as well. Obviously, there's the parole hearings, and he talks about the pain that he saw in his family members' eyes. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about that. It's just absolutely heartbreaking to hear. But, we're going to talk about a little bit about what Bugs was saying about Jay. But Anthony said of Jay, quote, he was a charismatic, dynamic person, end quote. And I think that's something just to kind of keep in the back of your head as we're kind of going to go into like the BS that the Bugs talked about. So in Helter Skelter, there was about 20 to 30 pages, and that was just about the victims. And that's one of the things that I talk about all the time over on my channel, Danny After Dark, or any true crime books. Everything is about the perpetrator, the killer, and there's so little focus on the victim. Times are changing, and that's a good thing. But for the most part, the victims are just, like Anthony said, it's just a footnote in the story. Some of the descriptions of Jay Written was that he was living beyond his means. He was trying to keep up with the Hollywood Joneses, and that was not the case. Yes, Paul.
So one of the things I'll be putting out, and I'll just give you guys a heads up now, is talking about Jay living beyond his means and being broke and like not a good businessman and all this stuff. Jay was worth over $300,000. Like his taxes for the year was based off of like $380,000, which in 1969, if somebody can do the math on that, how much 380 or 390, anyway, a lot of money. It also, we have stuff showing that the money he was being lent to keep living outside his means was actually investments in his hair products and him expanding his business, because he was the big thing when it came to hairstyles. Everybody came to his place, and it was from all walks of life. There was tons of stuff.
His books were kept really neat. I don't know if it was him doing it or his secretary, but
the
books were very organized.
One thing that
typewriter.
Yeah. Well, one thing that Anthony said about Jay, and I can't remember if he said it in the first or the second part, was that, like, his dad was very tough on it, wanted to be like A plus B equals C. This is how you do it. And so that sort of hard-headedness he took into the military, and then realized he didn't want to be told what to do in the military, but still had that mindset. It's like Frank Zappa talks about, his dad was a big military guy. And
World
Frank
War II,
Zappa,
right? Or
no?
Yeah. World War II, right? Most of these people's parents were in were in World War II.
Right. So, but from that, he has the same sort of meticulous mind,
right,
and does things like this, even if it's in a different way.
All right, I got the conversion. So $390,000, just to keep it simple, in 1969 is worth, for 2025, $3,375,795.
And we have the paperwork. Say it again,
what was the
Danny.
Number?
Oh, I just exited out.
Oh, it was 3 million. It was over 3 million.
Okay, yeah, just a general number. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so, he had the payment plan. We have the payment plan for Abigail Folger for this is after they all died, all their paperwork, right, that they had to get in order. And it showed the payment plan with interest from her payments into her investments into Sebring International. It wasn't to Jay Sebring. It was into Sebring International.
Now, what's crazy? What is, if he would have gotten into it, would have been interesting to know, looking at his financials and things like that, would be if he had already started either thinking about it, maybe he had gotten into it, real estate in and around Los Angeles, because that would have been the time, like Bill Cosby, because when Bill Cosby went through that whole trial thing that he dealt with, a lot of, man, that guy had a lot of real estate, like Sunset and Beverly Hills Boulevard and all kinds of stuff. But he started out in the 60s purchasing some of those lots and some of that real estate. So it would have been interesting to see if he was
where he would have expanded.
Right, exactly. If he was already like either thinking about it, or maybe he was already in that those the real estate the wheels were in motion. That would have been interesting to know.
All right, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, Paul, did you want to also touch upon Anthony, because you talked about in the interview karate in regards to Bruce Lee, and that Jay and Bruce were actually really good friends, and that they would train together. But this is, that there's one of the myths about that. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The one side of it is that Bug said something like Jay had like 2 karate lessons with Bruce Lee, but Jay had been, I guess, doing martial arts since before he met Bruce Lee. Then they met Bruce Lee, they became super tight. He discovered Bruce Lee, right? And
Kato, right? It wasn't his
Kato. He got
Kato in the Green Hornet, right? That's his show.
And this is when Hollywood was not hiring Asians to play Asian parts, right? And they was supposed to. Bruce Lee was supposed to be in Kung Fu. That ended up getting, I forget what the guy's name is.
The other guy, the other guy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's So wait, where was that? Sorry, my brain just detached at
that.
Bruce Lee.
Yeah, and that Jay was involved with karate prior to Bruce Lee as well.
Mm-hmm. And then he studied Jeet Kune Do with him a bunch. He wasn't a black belt. He never told people he was a black belt.
Yeah, that's one of the myths.
Bruce Lee's wife, he spent a lot of time with and was friendly with Bruce Lee's wife, and they'd chat about stuff. Not Jay, but Anthony, to learn some of this stuff. He has a whole bunch of letters between Bruce and Jay.
Carradine is his name.
Carradine, that's the guy's name.
I always wondered why that guy was like Kung Fu, but it was like a white dude. Growing up, I always wondered why it was a white dude. Literally, I did. I'm sorry, but I was little and I was like, why is that?
No, that's the thing is we don't our generation didn't understand it like that.
No, I honestly I questioned it when I was 5. I'm sorry. Or 6.
How dare you? You racist 5-year-old.
I did question it, dude, because I was like, wait, why? Well, because you had seen the Bruce. Okay, I saw Enter the Dragon as a kid before I saw the replays of the Kung Fu show, right? So I'm like, I was probably like 11 or 12 seeing the replays of that TV show, and I'm like, why is a dude white? Why is the guy a white dude, not like Bruce Lee? I don't know. I just thought about it.
It's well, that's the way kids' minds work.
I know. Yeah.
They're like, why wouldn't it be
right?
Why wouldn't it be this guy? Yeah.
But also, like to what Paul was saying, goes to show what the times were like back then, and how pivotal it was that Bruce Lee was able to then.
I'm not taking anything away from David Carradine. Like I'm sure he's a great actor, but it was just an odd choice to be playing that part. That's all.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get back to something a little more wholesome.
Just before we get on there.
Ruined my joke. I was gonna say Vincent Bugliosi. Okay.
Oh, okay. But the thing that's to keep in mind is, Jay Sebring brought Bruce Lee and got him this job. Some nobody who's just a hanger-on doesn't do that. You can't do that. You're not going to be on, TV shows, have guest appearances on Batman, all this sort of stuff if you're not plugged into Hollywood. There's no way. And he was doing all this stuff through his hair company and the people that he got brought on. It all started with one guy that pulled Jay in and was like, yeah, you can do my hair, and then hooked him up with the Rat Pack, and then the Rat Pack hooked him up with these other people, and et cetera, to the point where everybody's like, you see some of the advertisements are like, would you pay $20 to $50 for a haircut? And you got to think, you have multiple people under him giving these haircuts, and he's getting a cut of all these things.
Oh, I know. I know.
But yeah, we'll get more.
No, remember how we talked about it? This whole thing was about hair pieces.
Oh, yeah. Man, I guess it must have been like a really big thing back then. The hair thing and the wig thing. And
I think the wig thing was a big deal, and guys just didn't want to be bald. But then Kojak was bald.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it, man. Kojak was an early 70s popular detective show. So I don't know.
Back when people half the time actually looked like real people, rather than everybody having a jawline that could cut fucking glass.
Right. Yeah.
God.
All right. Off you go, Danny.
To wrap up Bugs. So Anthony made a really, really excellent point here. Was he said he tried to interview Bugs several times, but Bugs always declined the interviews, which I found that very interesting, especially from a family member's perspective. But I have my own feelings on it, but that's neither here nor there. But Yeah, so Anthony tried and Bugs turned it down. So
he talked to a lot of people. He had been studying this for 20 years, trying to figure it out. He talks about how he was ready for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, you know, and yeah, people can make arguments like, well, they're not going to say this or that to him, and well, he's not going to do this or that. But says who? Like, there's lots of people that'll just be like, yeah, sorry, man, this is what happened. And yeah, so it's too bad he didn't get to talk to what's his name again, Dennis Hopper, because he was going to talk to him again after he had they had done the interview that went on the documentary.
So now the interview between Paul and Anthony goes to Tom O'Neill and Chaos. So Anthony discusses how Tom was doing a piece on the victims, and this is typically more than what was covered in regards to a piece on the victims. Because again, true crime culture is very focused on the perpetrator or the killer or killers, if you will, not so much on doing pieces on the victims. So Anthony, his mom, and Tom O'Neill met at a cafe. They talked for about 2 hours. Anthony's mom confided in Tom. His mom didn't want the interview recorded, so Tom put the recorder back in his pocket. One of the things that Anthony shares, and his mother mostly shares during this interview, and I did not know this until this interview, was that Anthony's mom was pregnant at the time of the murders, and due to the stress of everything, had actually miscarried, so lost the baby. And she did share that with Tom.
And it's a thing that I think is crazy is people being like, well, he was 3. What does he know? Well, I wasn't alive during the Holocaust, and that shit affects the hell out of me.
Right? Generational trauma.
Generational trauma.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, and you're there for all this stuff. You see your family crying every year on all these things. You see them super affected by all this stuff. And it is, I have some memories from when I was 3. I know, there's just so many things that get dismissed that it doesn't seem right that they do.
And it's so easy for somebody on the outside, like you just said, to say, oh, he was 3. Okay, and now I'm going to close my laptop and close my true crime books and go on my merry way and lead my life. This is their life.
Yeah, this is the family, his exact family. That's the other thing I can't stress enough is there's literally portrayals of his uncle being murdered for Hollywood. It's crazy. That's a crazy thing to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. So going back to this, so Tom was contacted Anthony later and said it was one of the more difficult interviews that he did, again, the one with him and his mother, and it altered the course of his research. So this having an impact on Anthony. Anthony talks about how they became friendly, spoke over 20 years. Anthony would share information with Tom and vice versa. There was a trust there. He trusted him. Then Tom's article for the New York Times came out, and it didn't reflect the reality of what Anthony had experienced in that meeting. And one of the things
for the text tapes.
Yes. I didn't even finish my damn sentence.
Well, I don't know why you broke that sentence up.
You know what, Paul? Where are your notes? Where are your notes?
That's kind of linked.
Right up here in the steel trap, Danielle.
Lord help us all. Anthony, call me next time. I'm just kidding. All respect. So the text tapes. So this is where Anthony says that law enforcement had said, they listened to the tapes and told Anthony and Deborah Tate they could request the tapes. And I totally never say this word right. FOIA. Thank you for FOIA. And if you request it, if it's granted, then it will become public domain. So the concerns about the tapes, could they be exploited? And Anthony said, are there other murders involved that are discussed on this tapes? Is there any new information? And he was told, no, and no. So that's
he'd also been given, like, everybody puts all of law enforcement and all of the lawyers and all of everybody into one package, right? Anthony hadn't been given any reason from the people he was talking to distrust what he was being told. He'd also talked to somebody who was high up in the investigation during the time and gotten a lot of good information there, which, stay tuned for the book, because it will be all discussed in there.
We have an important question here in the chat.
You mean my bookshelf? It's right there.
So now we go to the part of the interview about the parole hearings. Anthony talks about how he has been to many, spoken at many. However, he has not been to Manson's, or had not been prior to Manson's passing away. And one of the things that he talks about is that he saw how the inmates and the attorneys had kind of sculpted and diminished the responsibilities of the murderers, saying they were victims of Manson. Did you want to elaborate on that, Paul, or is it pretty straightforward?
Yeah, no, because one of the things that he said, the reason they never went to Manson's parole hearings is Manson didn't want to get out. There was never he never tried to do anything to get out of prison. So, why would they go through it another time if it's just going to be Manson fucking around, like in the, like in his, I mean, I don't know if fucking around's the right word, but just not trying.
They weren't as serious in their parole meetings as some of the other murderers were.
Right.
We're actually trying to get out where Manson, yeah.
Yeah.
So we go back in regards to Anthony mentioning Tom O'Neill in the text tapes. So Anthony now had told Tom O'Neill about the tapes and how if the tapes were released, it would exploit the case and the murderers would try to mitigate their involvement. And Tom then stated that the tapes would reveal that there was more murders and the tapes being released would overturn the convictions of the women. And you could hear in Anthony's tone of voice when he's saying this to Paul, it's like the frustration of like, where did you get this? That's not what was said.
Yeah, that's basically the takeaway I've gotten from everybody I've talked to who's been interviewed by O'Neill. Is it like, wait, I didn't say it like that. I didn't say that. And it's multiple people. There's a laundry list. It's anyway.
Yeah. So
let me just before you move on here. One of the notes you have here, I just want to elaborate on a little bit, is he talks about Tom has a gold mine now with his book. And what he was getting at with that is like, he doesn't know why he keeps pushing it so hard, because he's like, he's made his money. I don't know why he bothers like looking at our show that isn't anything. It's just like some little fucking public access show on YouTube with like minuscule in the grand scheme of things viewership. But he just doesn't understand how it keeps going and keeps getting pushed in these weird directions. And it wasn't that he thought like the book should be all about his uncle or anything. It was more just he thought it would come around and dispel some of the myths, because that's how it had been brought forward to him, that this is what it was going to do. It was going to start telling the story of like Helter Skelter and what Bugs said about the victims and stuff. And then it would, come back and hit really. And like, O'Neill's seen the paperwork we've seen. And so it's, nothing written about no $390,000 in chaos.
Okay. So one of the things that, and when I heard Anthony say this in the interview, in my notes, you can see all my little like star points. Tom followed the same narrative that Bugliosi did. That was one of the things that I had been saying kind of behind the scenes with y'all for a bit, is it's the same. Like, he did the same thing that Bugs did, just in a slightly different path, but nonetheless on the same path, in my perspective. So, and in some of the cases, again, according to Anthony, in the Tom O'Neill book, vilifying the victims yet again. And yes, Paul.
Okay, I have to, because this person reminded me that came in. So when we were talking, and I wanted to mention the victims, I totally forgot to mention Stephen Parent. Right after we were done, the day after we were done, Anthony got a hold of me and was like, "Oh, I can't believe that I forgot to mention Stephen Parent, because he's tight with the Parent family and he has great respect for them." So I put in the notes of the interview that was something that had happened and that we had forgotten about that, which we feel terrible about, and apologies to the Parent family. Yes. But, you know, he's stressed. I'm fucking terrified of what I'm doing there. I'm just like, I don't want to fuck this up. And your head's just, you're going a million miles an hour. No excuse. I was going to say it at some point tonight, and so I'm glad that you brought it up, because, you know, Stephen Parent lost his life too, needlessly, and so yeah. So if I can go through, many apologies, and it was not on purpose. It was not a slight. It was just fuck up, you know. And Anthony wanted to make sure that we went over it, and that we put, somebody posted the interview on Manson blog, and so I wrote it in there too, in the comments, because it's very important.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, on you go.
Thanks. So Anthony had said that, based on a lot of the, again, vilifying of the victims in regards to particular traits of Jay, Anthony can dispute some of those things. And there was a quote that Anthony said that really resonated with me personally. It was, quote, "There were two Jay Sebrings, the man who lived and the man who lies defenseless in his grave," end quote. Mm-hmm. And it's just...
his friends had said that, or I think one of his family members said that to him. It was like, there's two Jay Sebrings. There's this fucking story that's been made, and then there's the guy that we all knew.
Yeah. So in regards to something very simple in chaos, but Anthony makes it very clear, and this is just one example, is that Tom wrote that Tex Watson had shot Jay twice, but he was only shot once. And Anthony says this is just one example showing the treatment and the disregard for the victims in all of these narratives. How do you mess with that?
Sorry, he had sent that to Tom as well, which Tom had put in the emails when he did his little spiel. He also, a couple of the things that he said, which I've found that he does, I could have put this in there if, but I was being respectful. So the things that he says, well, I could have put this in there, those are also going to be addressed in the book.
Mm-hmm. So again, it's just, and he's spot on. It's just one of those things where that was easy information, and Anthony kind of goes to show, because it was a victim, okay, that's just kind of a disregard. But if you were doing that example on the kind of the murderer side, it would be different. There's just, because it's just something.
Just quick, they're just doing quick brush strokes.
Yeah.
His book will be released in the summer. I'll ask him if it's okay when I say what month or if I say what month.
Or beginning of summer, end of summer, any.
Yeah. The summer.
It would be helpful.
The summer. I'm
looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it. So
me too.
Whenever it comes out.
You gotta say the year after summer. It's like the movie. Like when a big movie comes out, you gotta say like the year.
Yeah.
Summer
2025.
Or whatever. Right. You got to, man. You gotta say the year. It's like that. That's how it is, right?
Right. Yep.
So Anthony gives another example about the phone number quote that Tom put about Jay, and Anthony talks about how Jay Sebring was very private, and he was very private with his clientele. And he had so much information, based on who his friends were and who he was working with. And he didn't put any of that out. He just kept it to himself.
It was said that he was super braggadocious about his clientele and all this stuff, which a lot of this stuff is just like second and third hand gossip.
Yeah. All right. So we get to the part where Anthony talks about Tom O'Neill's quote about being rebuffed by the victims' families. And Anthony, when I say in my notes, sets the record straight, he sets the damn record straight. He's like, here's the deal. He talked to Sebring's, Jay Sebring's sister, Anthony's mom, for 2 hours, talked to Sharon's sister for over 20 years, talked to Anthony. Man. Anthony says, we spoke for 20 years?
20 years as well.
For 20 years. Tom had total access to them. So Anthony flat out asks him, like, why didn't you put any of that in there? And he didn't really, wasn't an answer.
There's basically a cliff note in the back saying Jay Sebring's nephew said that, refuted some of my claims, but I found proof that he was broke, which he didn't find proof that he was broke. There was like the hearsay from, what's his name? Polanski and I think someone else, but there's the paperwork to show. So
yeah,
for me one of the things, just real quick, for Tom missing out on Melcher was, how did you not know he didn't produce Kokomo?
What, you wanted a chapter in chaos?
Chaos, I'm like, okay, because Melcher is part of on the front end, right? About how he felt Melcher had some information about everything that went, because Melcher was right embedded in it, and I'm like, you could have given him some ego, like, man, that was a great song. Kokomo, 1988 was a #1 hit. Something
you ought to see some brainwashing. You should see a bunch of people in the crowd going, Aruba, Jamaica.
You know what? After tonight's episode, everybody, as just a way to decompress, do yourself a favor, stay on YouTube and type Mike, the Beach Boys, Mike Love's Summer of Love.
Oh,
you're welcome in advance.
That'll be 3 minutes of your life you will never get back.
You know what, Paul? I'm just we all need to decompress.
Be a hater.
Or maybe Tom O'Neill needs to decompress. Okay, moving on.
Arriba.
So.
Arriba.
Arriba McIntyre? Are we going country?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
It's late. It's like 10 o'clock. Sorry.
Anthony, I'm trying here. I'm trying to keep this ship sailing. I don't know what to say.
We're doing it. We got it.
So, continuing on. So, we get a bit full disclosure, somebody who has a true crime channel and is into true crime, has always been. And hearing Anthony speak about this and about how people who are into true crime, it was tough to hear. He's not wrong. He is not wrong at all. And he was spot on where he says true crime, it strips the victims of their humanity. And a lot of times, most of the time, that's kind of how the stuff is able to be kind of passed around and repackaged and put out there, is because it's put in a way where now they're so stripped away that they're not, again, they're just not human. They're not relatable. It's,
you're not going to feel bad about it.
Yeah, you don't feel bad. It's that, you know, they did something that might have put themselves at risk, or they're not relatable to anybody in my family. So you're able to kind of step back and process it more easily, when in reality it's no, this can happen to anybody. But that's just not the way it's put forward from the media and in a lot of books that there are. And what, to me, and I've given some quotes here, the standout quote from Anthony Paul throughout this entire first part of the interview was when Anthony says someone once told him that it's not a good idea to do this documentary about his uncle because, quote, you're too close to him, you're too subjective, end quote. And I'm like, you're too close. If not you, then who else? So everybody else who has never met your uncle can write whatever they want and put out and make whatever they want. But no, you can't do that. You're too close to it. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me that he was told that? But Anthony's response was, maybe those who were doing it as a cash grab aren't close enough.
Right. And I thought that, yeah, he was very poignant.
Yeah.
With some of the stuff he was saying. It was a really good point.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that fucked me up. Why, like, I had to step back for a super long time, because it's like you reevaluate. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, who am I? Am I? Like, I thought I was an empathetic person, you know, and I am, if the thing's right in front of me. But this thing has become so ingrained in like pop culture that it doesn't feel real, you know?
But it's very real.
It's super real, and it's real to people. It's as real as me thinking about my grandparents being tortured in Auschwitz, is him thinking about his uncle being tortured in Cielo Drive. And there's movies about it. Graphic movies about that exact moment.
Right. And it's so easy for, like I said earlier, and I just want to make it and say it in the most simplest way that there is. It's so, and I'll just use myself, for example. It's so easy for me to watch something on World War II, or watch, you know, a documentary or some movie about the Manson family, shut my TV off, close my laptop, and go on with my life. But for those who are involved and connected, that is their life. They don't get to shut it off and then go, like, that is their life. And that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And it's a tough lesson, but I'm glad that, you know, we're trying to learn it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And when Anthony says this in the interview, he's mad. He's frustrated. He's angry. He doesn't hold back, and he has every right to be. And as a listener of this interview, you hear that. And it's so, as a listener, it's needed. We need to hear his frustration. We need to hear this is not okay, because as he goes on to say, there's cultural and historical repercussions for all this bullshit that still gets put forward through all of this misinformation. And he talks about the sensationalism, the distortion, and the exploitation, and the cost of that now in all these parole hearings. Because again, he's saying that the Manson they're saying, you know, we weren't Manson followers, but Anthony's saying, yes, you were cold-blooded killers. You're claiming that you were not, that you were just following him. But
you were meaning to say that they were just saying.
Sorry, as I just said that, I'm like, yeah, I butchered that. But you know what I meant.
No, that's okay. I know what you meant.
Sorry, yeah.
What he's saying is, like, them and their lawyers are looking for any sort of, like, chink in the armor, that they're able to be like, well, he said he was looking right, but he was actually looking left. So how would he not, you know? And like, you know, the girls were just normal middle class. Everybody was all peachy keen until Manson came and sprinkled some of the ooga booga, or the ooey-oo. That's from the family. I get such a kick out of ooey-oo. That being something to say. Anyway.
But at whose expense is this? The victims.
Right.
And they have to sit there and hear this over and over and over.
Right. And it feels a lot like it's like, yeah, I take responsibility, but.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. See, like that's how I apologize to these two off camera. I'm sorry, but it's not the same. It's not the same. All right. Anyway, so one of the things that Anthony says is he, in regards to, like Beckham was saying, everybody wants the answer, the short-term answer. In part one of this interview, and we all look forward to part two because there's going to be way more information. But in part one, Anthony says they were a crime syndicate, but mostly a crime gang. So,
yeah,
he gives this theory right there.
And that's, I mean,
while Paul is that way and that way. So at the end of the interview, no, that's fine. Paul can't multitask. It's all good. We know this, friends. No, so
I could barely task.
Beckham?
Yeah.
With all the AI stuff that people can do now, you might want to do that off camera.
What is it? He's having chocolate milk.
Doing something that someone's going to make a video of. I'm telling you right now.
All right.
So Anthony talks about the variety of clientele that his uncle Jay Sebring had, because there's this kind of, again, one of the myths and the theories was, all the criminals, all the mobsters that he was connected with, but a lot. Thank you, Corey. I expect an email by the tomorrow morning. So he talks about, who else was his clientele, and he names names. And I'll be honest, some of the names I did not know who they were, had to Google them. But he gives a variety, archbishops, politicians, congressmen, sports athletes, Steve McQueen, Frank Sinatra, as we knew, so many other performers. And why was this not put in Tom O'Neill's book? Because it doesn't fit the narrative.
That's the thing, is you got your story and you're sticking to it.
Yeah.
Everything else be damned. I
doesn't
know
fit
what
the
all
narrative.
this
That's
means.
a good point, Danny.
Yeah. I know what this means. You don't.
Mm-hmm.
This, that, and the next things.
And then lastly, the bodyguards. In regards to why Jay had bodyguards. And Anthony clearly explains that it was the union versus Jay. The barbers union was trying to shake Jay down, and
they were charging like cents for haircuts. And here Jay's making $20 a haircut without a barber's license, because he was doing hairdressing and doing his own thing, carving his own niche. And about unions back in the day, right? So there'll be more about the Charlie Barron and the Little Joe and stuff in the next installment, because he talked to and is actually quite close with Joe Tornuevo. I had to think about it for a second.
It's his name a little bit. Yeah, it's a little.
I said his name wrong to Anthony. He had to give me like a lesson on how to say it.
For the longest time, though, but for the longest time, we were always on that. Like, who did he talk to, right? Or why was he called? Why was he given that communication about, don't worry or whatever, right? That whole thing. So we always wondered about that. That was one of the key pieces that we always wanted, that information.
One of the things,
the longest time.
One of the things he was talking about, that Little Joe was talking about, is like everyone was calling in basically to see what happened, and everybody has their way of saying, you'll be all right, like, don't worry about it, man, I know you're scared. Everyone was scared, right? So, but it's just made to sound like, don't worry, you didn't do anything, and so
that's why it threw us off for the longest time. We were like, what did that mean? And why
would Charlie Barron be phoning?
Yeah, right, exactly, man. That sent me on a whole, like, Paramount, like, remember, I think that's what sent me on that whole side research deal, right? Because I was like, who's this guy? And then I started uncovering the whole Paramount connection. I was like, holy, and it just started blowing my mind, right? like And we always wondered about that piece of information
Mm-hmm.
for the longest time.
And so there's more information coming about that. And yeah, again, I'll say that everything that I've been given and will be given from Anthony to do with this stuff, it'll be put on our Facebook page.
And that's why that's what got us to buy that thick book that I haven't even opened it yet. Yeah. The mob book, that thick one. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of it.
Oh, have you?
And yeah, Tony, as long as you behave, come on down, come on over.
So Paul or Beckham, was there any other points in the part 1 of the interview that I didn't capture in my notes that you both or either of you think are worth pointing out?
I think you caught a lot of the emotion that was there. Again, it's close to his heart. Of course, it's his uncle, that type of thing. So you really put a lot of that out there. You touched upon. Remember, guys, I've always said what I do. If you gave me 5 years of financials, I could figure a lot out just by the research on that into that. However, having already seen some of his statements, right? Very organized, very neat, man. Even for, like I said, like a typewriter. Like, I don't know if it was him or if it was somebody else doing it, but it was the books were kept really nice and clean, man. And it wasn't handwritten. It was all like typed out. And I don't know if you're going to put that out or not, but
we are. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So everybody will see that. So yeah, they kind of matched with what Danny was talking about and reference about, his worth and what he probably would have become, right? He would have become that hairdresser person.
He would have been that guy. He would have just
that guy, right?
And again,
it would have been interesting to see in the late 60s that he already gotten into the real estate portion of that, because like I said, Bill Cosby did it as a comedian in the late 60s when he started earning money and all that type of thing. So it would have been
who, side note, who a really interesting person who made their fortune off of real estate was Vanilla Ice.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, right.
When he got his money for that single, he invested it all in like crazy real estate and became like super rich.
Well, a lot of in 08, right? Or like I think when a lot of the market crashed in 08 and those houses were like went foreclosed, I think that's where he had the capital to put into a lot of those houses, and he fixed them up and resold them. Yeah, I mean, he made a lot of money on that on the financial crash.
Yeah, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was where the documents came from, that the travel document that was written up. And I'm going to kind of cherry pick out of these messages I have, because I don't want to out anybody on anything. So the copy was got from Howard Davis. He had the original. It was given to him by retired detective William Barker of Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. He ended up, like, Manson had been arrested there at some point, and so that's probably how the guy ended up with that paperwork. Let's see here. Everything on that document checks out. The addresses of the various parole officers, the phone numbers, and yes, the probation officer's signature at the bottom, as well as Manson's handwriting, Roger Smith's name. She had exchanged these parole documents with some of the parole documents that O'Neill had been talking about in his post about it. And the person she had been exchanging them with, who is also a prolific researcher, had seen no fault in it. Let's see here. Of course, the travel is handwritten. it was something given to a parolee to show law enforcement if he was stopped for something. And this is how the person expect that's how Bill Barker ended up with it. Or Baker, sorry. Bill Baker ended up with it. Because we do know Manson spent time in Santa Barbara. The researcher's guess is that Manson never checked in with the parole office once he got back to San Francisco Bay. And the person that we got the document from was a really good researcher on Manson blog named Deb Silva. Mm-hmm. So these things, good to check them out. The last time I had apologized because I didn't know exactly where they were from and I couldn't back anything up with it. Now I know where they're from. And that's a standard practice, I guess, is them giving them that thing. So Vanilla Ice admitted he lied about that story.
Oh, no, they're going back and forth about it.
Oh, okay.
Paul, it's fine. We moved on.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Anyway, so I wanted to clear that up. Again, I want to thank Anthony DiMaria for talking to us. And I want to make sure that this time I actually, give the proper, I don't know what the right word is for it. Rest in peace to Sharon Tate, her baby Paul, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, Stephen Parent, sorry, my brain, Shorty Shea, and I'm blanking, help me. Rosemary and Lino LaBianca, as well as, why am I blanking on his name? We went to his house in Topanga Canyon. Gary Hinman. I'm sorry. I am jet lagged. Gary Hinman.
I was going to help you out, but I wanted to give you a chance.
Did I miss anyone? I don't think I did.
No.
So I appreciate everybody hanging in there with me stumbling over my words. And
check out part 2 when that comes out.
Mm-hmm. Within the next week or so, I'll have that sorted out and ready to go, and then we will do another show on it and chat about it. But thanks again to everyone. Do you guys have anything you want to say before we scram?
No, just again, everybody, I encourage everybody to, again, not only just listen once, but listen more than once. I listened several times and picked up things along the way that I missed the previous time, because Anthony gives a lot of information and it needs to be heard. And so, let's give him that. And again, I look forward to part 2. And again, big shout out. Thank you, Anthony, for interviewing with Paul.
Yeah. Yep. We'll talk to you all later. Bye for now.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.